I was struck by Sandy's the visiting principles for tourists for the tourists, and it was very interesting. It reminded me, China when the Chinese started going overseas, middle income traveling. They actually had to write a book for the Chinese and say, okay, you can't jaywalk, you can't crowd the buffet line. It's called a line. You can't spit. You got to do this. So it was interesting that they actually had to write a rule book for their tourists going outbound. And so I thought that was a brilliant observation, because I do think when you land at this beautiful airport, there should be a sign or a pamphlet and say, here's who we are, here's where you're at, and pay attention, because we are.
I just want to add to that, because I do remember going up to the park, and this was obviously before Chip's time, but and in some of the outhouses that they have up at Bradley Taggart Lake, there were signs that the park had posted, because the Chinese tend to stand on the toilets, right? Because they have seats. And there was, the red circle with the arrow through it that said no standing on the toilet, essentially, because they didn't know culturally even how to act or how to do it. So, yes. Any questions?
Can I just add a funny story that I had? So, right before I came, I ran career services at Harvard Kennedy School. And there were people coming into like CIA briefings and different things in like Budweiser t-shirts. And nobody knew how to talk about it, and it was kind of a broken system. And I'm like, well, this is stupid. You just have to tell the students this is how you have to play. And if you don't, you're getting kicked out. And there was this fear, like, you can't do that. And I am kind of bullheaded and stupid sometimes, and I'm like, I don't care. I'm raising 4 sons. I'm telling them I'm going to, create these principles. And we did. And what happened at the Kennedy School was fairly amazing in that everybody stepped up and so many people said thank you, including the students. So this thing of being afraid to say what are our core principles and how do we have to act, how do we let go of that to find the courage to say here's what we're looking for, here's what we need, and actually people are going to appreciate it instead of, feeling like, oh my gosh, who are these people? So anyway, that story just came. But
questions?
All 3 of you talked about the 3 players: private sector, public sector, not-for-profit. As I look around the room, I see a lot of people not-for-profit. I see a lot of retired people who've been involved in not-for-profit. I see a number of government leaders. But in this valley, you talk about the straw that stirs the drink. That's the private sector. Why don't we see more of our private sector leaders really providing leadership and direction to this valley? And I may have insulted some of you who are sitting out there, but I'd like to hear from you. Who are the private sector leaders? Whose hand is on that straw, and how do we stir it?
It's a great question. I guess I'll start. A big part of it is aligning incentives in some way, shape, or form. And, there's carrot and stick approach, right? So you can align incentives and you can do everything you can from a sort of carrot perspective, but I think sometimes the stick is needed, right? And that's regulation. That's my point about regulating systems. And if you don't regulate them, they will become toxic over time, whatever that system is. So, Yvon Chouinard, right, did what he did. I don't think we expect lots of people in this room to frankly do that, or lots of people in the private sector in Jackson to do what he did. Just for those of you who don't know, if you don't, he basically gave away his company and he was a billionaire and essentially became a non-billionaire and dedicated for perpetuity into a trust every single penny of profit from his company to go to fight climate change. And he did that at his own personal expense. So we have to find a way to get the private business owners in this community to, again, in my view, to understand you can do well by doing good and you can do good by doing well. And it's good business to think long-term about the long-term health of your community. But at the same time, sometimes the stick is critical, and for the electeds out there, it's easy for me to say, but that's an important part of it as well.
I think one piece, Gary did a trustee meeting at Silicon Couloir, which is a relatively new organization here. But we have lots of the people who've recently moved in. Some are in this room, many are not. but to really push that Silicon Couloir isn't just an entrepreneurial organization or a business growth organization, but it really is a purpose-driven, people, profit, planet organization. So if you want to play, these are the values that we're going to play by. And you know, in what I try to teach, you know, I sometimes am not liked very much, but I talk about it a lot, and it doesn't mean that you can't be financially viable, but you need to find that other piece. So I'm not sure, you know, where we go with regulation, but I do think a lot of it starts with breathing in the core values. And your point is well taken. Like, how many people who are here have lived here less than 5 years? That's awesome. Thank you. I didn't even know there were that many, right? So we need to find more of those new people to be in the conversation as well, because you do look at Manny Lopez, you look at Bill Newton. There were lots of people who were strong business folks who came to the Valley with this commitment to come back. You know, Phil, where are you? To make that commitment to the Valley. And I think as so many new people do move in, that we need to have this voice to say, here's what it means to be part of the community, particularly from the business standpoint.
And Mark, I know you're next, but real quickly, it is what we talked about at our table, what I like to call the Jackson ethos. So having been here for a long time, and a lot of the people that have, you know, Jackson has always been a place where, from an economic stratification perspective, it was very flat, in the sense that nobody really cared who you were, how much money you had, what your name was, where you came from, how famous you were. We were all the same. We're all here because we'd like to ski or mountain bike or do something in the outdoors, and we were also all a community. And as new people come on into the community, and as demographics change, and we're now the wealthiest county in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, that's going to change to some extent. But it is still the core of who we are. And I think each of us every single day needs to help to remind ourselves and each other and our businesses and everybody what that Jackson ethos is all about.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to acknowledge Sandy, and that it's really great to have you guys involved with the Silicon Couloir and representing that form of leadership and that style of entrepreneurialism, and I really appreciate that. And I think we should be grateful as a community that they are doing what they're doing. My question is to the three of you who have been steeped in the free market and entrepreneurialism, should we have a cap on growth in this community? And if you think we should have a cap on growth in this community, how will we get there? Because that seems to be such an affront to anything that the private market represents that I just have a very hard time seeing it happen. But I also hear most of this room say that they can't imagine a future without a cap on growth.
I think that's unrealistic to have cap without growth. I mean, that's an oxymoron, right? There's no growth. You have to have growth. You have how you reinvent yourself, your principles, your values. Bucks County is still growing, but it's a lovely place to live. Our biggest problem now, it's so nice where I live that my kids or my doctor's friends' kids, they're 30, 31 starting families, they want to come back to Doylestown. Well, guess what? Can't afford it. So now we're having another debate. It's incredible. Like, I don't want them not coming because it's too. I don't want them in Philadelphia. That's for sure. So it's an ongoing debate, but I don't think you can cap growth. That's to me, that's kind of an oxymoron. And responsible growth. Brian Moynihan, our CEO, you talk about the private sector stepping up. Responsible growth, sustainable growth. There's no silver bullet. It's a work in progress. It's a work in progress, but maybe you can teach us how to do it.
I think it's an interesting question now that I live in Victor. And, you know, for 11 years, I was very Jackson-centric. I think there are ways to cap or to say if you're coming into Teton County, you need to pay a little bit more. You need to be responsible and not just bring in your billions and be able to take your private jet out without putting some more roots here. Like, if we had more funds to support some of the services and the housing and the transportation. Like, I actually love going back to Victor now. It's very different. I mean, it's quieter. It's different. How do we expand how we think about the Teton community, the greater Teton ecosystem, to provide the services and the flow to be able to be one community. Because otherwise, we do have a huge problem because we have walls that are tight in a place that's really desirable.
And so, yes, tough, to Joe and to Sandy, tough issue. A couple of points. First of all, there's always repercussions to decisions that we as a community make. So if you do cap growth, you're going to make this place less affordable, right? As I said earlier, demand is always going to exceed supply for the real estate that's here because 97% of our valley is public land. So, you know, if we want to cap growth but at the same time keep a thriving middle class, which is one of the visions of Silicon Couloir, how do we do that, right? What steps do we need to take to be able to do that as well? And now I may rankle some other feathers here for some of the electeds that are in the room, because I am not elected, and Jessica and Mark and the rest of them, Jonathan and whoever else here, Jim, you know, you all are. So take this with a grain of salt. This is free advice and it's worth what you're getting. But if we have a comprehensive plan that we've passed and developers come before you and they ask for conditional use changes, and they ask for variances, and they ask for all sorts of things, if you do it on a piecemeal basis, by the time you're done with, you know, the first 5 or 6 people that come in, your comprehensive plan is gone and shot and out the window. So if you're an elected, or you know, as a community, we have to think of the repercussions of every single one of our actions in the greater whole. And it sort of goes a little bit to the I and we that Sandy was talking about. This is in the public sector, not necessarily the private sector. But when you're making those decisions, it's, you know, what are the repercussions and impacts of that variance in the long run? And how is that going to change our ability to achieve, keep our eyes on the prize and achieve that goal? It's challenging. Again, you know, I don't have the answer. God bless you guys. But, you know, that would be one of my thoughts is, you know, stick to the plan.
I think one piece just before that, you know, as we come up with our plan is, how do we have civil discourse again on really, really challenging things without polarizing, without vilifying, without, hyperbolizing? Because if I say something or Gary says something like that, or somebody else says, you know, I want this, and immediately we become the demon or the socialist. You know, what about if we all just became soulists, right? Like we start with, you know, what is the soul that we want for this community, and what is the soul within all of us that has that interconnectivity and that engagement? Just a question.
Well, I love Sandy.
Hello, I'm Sophie. I'm a student from the high school, so I really appreciate listening to this. Thank you. Yeah, June. And so my question is specifically for Joe. You talk about preserving these communities, like for example in Jackson, shutting down cars, ensuring that there's no growth within, or no infrastructure growth within Jackson to preserve the existing ecosystem, shutting down the airport. My question for you is that actions like those tend to have a legacy in racism and racially motivated zoning. So if you look to, you know, white cities, you know, there's this concept of gating our community and preventing our community from, preventing new people from coming into our community. And if we shut down the airport, wealthy people are still gonna be able to come into Jackson. It's not wealthy people that we're keeping out if we shut down the airport. We're keeping out the greater, you know, we are keeping out middle income individuals, or keeping out impoverished individuals who just want access to the national parks. And I think my question for you is, how do you toe that line and still allow for democratic access to these beautiful places while preventing, you know, damaging growth within the community?
Great question. And I was kind of kidding about the airport closing, but I wasn't kidding when be careful how big those planes get. I don't know how big a plane you can land over here, but this is a beautiful place. The bigger the plane, the more people in that sense. So infrastructure is so important, and I'm very frustrated, have been forever. Lauren Sanfilippo and my colleagues back there, we've written about this forever. We have a third world infrastructure in this country. You go Army Corps of Engineers, you look at the grade, I think it's what, D+, in many cases. I have to go through New Jersey every day, which is a nightmare, so to speak. And Penn Station, ever been to Penn Station? Please don't go there. It's not safe. It's not, you know. So infrastructure, but I was struck by driving in. Phil drove us in from the airport yesterday, and I don't want to see a monorail or something god-awful against that beautiful riverbed in the, you know, the Grand Tetons. But isn't there a better way to move people around that's affordable, right? You got a lot of people coming from outside working. Why do they have to sit on the road and sit there and burn gas and have that carbon footprint increase? And can't we do better? So we've got to think outside the box in that sense. So and I do believe in growth. I mean, I'll tell you, you know, in Doylestown where I live, we did cap the airport because you can get a small Cessna in there, but like there's some CEOs that want to put their big planes in there every Sunday night when they come up from Florida. No, we're not. And the whole town was for that. And now they're going to like try to do helicopters. So we'll see what happens next. They never stop. So it's a push and pull. It's a push and pull in that sense.
Just real quick while you're going to ask one more. We live in a pretty homogeneous community. I mean, I think there's clearly no doubt about that, although we have a big sector of our community that we haven't really been able to incorporate into this room, right? The Latino Hispanic sector of this community, right? So, you know, a big question for us in my organization at Silicon and I think everywhere should be how do we get together? How do we find as a community that we can engage each other in a productive way so that we, as perhaps privileged white people, better understand what they are going through. You know, I've had that speech with my 2 boys who were born and raised here that, you know, if you ever get stopped for drunk driving or for, you know, speeding or whatever it is, just be respectful, all that other stuff, right? But they will never understand what it's like to be a minority and be stopped like that. So the question is, how can they and me and all of us better understand what that lived experience is for people that are not like us so that we can make better decisions?
Gary, you jog my memory. Doylestown, I keep coming back to Doylestown. Big brouhaha a couple of years ago. They're going to run the bus from inner city Philadelphia up to Doylestown. Like, oh my God, here come the hordes. Well, guess what? Those people on the bus, they get on at 6 o'clock in the morning. Many of them are African Americans. They're the hardest working people in the town. They love the town, they appreciate it, the income they earn, and they go back and spend it in inner city Philadelphia. It's a win-win-win if we can get over our myopic ignorance.
Sorry to hog the mic. I'm also from the high school. I'm June. And I have a question about circular economies and how that applies to Jackson Hole. So we have a lot of awesome businesses, nonprofits, public government officials, but how do we incorporate all of those sectors into creating a sustainable economy?
I do think, I mean, the economics of mutuality basically is about circular economies. And it's the question when you start an initiative, again, it's not just in the benefit for me or my organization or whatever my closed structure is, but the benefit for how does this benefit the community? How does this benefit the environment? And if we can build that into the ecosystem of our decision making, that's why I tried to, you know, share briefly the story of Snow King. Not that it's been easy or simple, but Snow King exists because of that circular economy. There's many, many organizations here that are private sector. You know, one that comes to mind, one of my dear friends is Taylor Piggott. And in her gallery, you know, she does many things for the community. You know, if you wanted to do something, many of her marketing campaigns bring in like the Raptor Center to, again, highlight and bring up the needs and the benefits to all of us. So it does go back to me to this core value as a community that can we support each other, nudge each other, push each other, encourage each other, have carrots and sticks, whatever the answer is, to make sure that success is in this circular, mutual beneficial way and not just in the much more self-interested way.
Yeah, and I'm just going to go back and say that, again, the free market's a tool. It's one of the tools that we have to help us succeed as a society. in achieving whatever our societal goals are. One of the really strengths of the market is unleashing creativity. And so we need to, again, help incentivize entrepreneurs and existing companies to look at what a circular economy looks like and how it can be beneficial for them and, frankly, profitable for them as well. And then, of course, you've got the nonprofit, and all those three sectors should all be working together in their own way to try and figure out how to do this.
Well, Gary, Gary and I go way back. Gary was on the board with me when I was first elected in 2002. You, I think, made the statement that said, we don't really have a desire to measure the qualitative aspects. I guess my question is it really we don't have the desire, or really that it's hard work and we haven't set it as a priority? And perhaps it should be set as a priority because it really underpins a lot of the discussion that's happened today.
You're spot on, Janine. I don't know if my exact words were desire, but we, it's much easier to measure quantitative metrics than it is qualitative. And because of that, it's not laziness, but it's just maybe we don't have the desire. Maybe we're not willing to put in the hard work in general that we should be putting in. And again, I keep going back to what I'm doing right now, but we, Sandy and I and Silicon Couloir, are putting a values-based leadership institute together because I think leadership is one of the most undervalued traits that you could have out there, and because it's qualitative, not quantitative. So I would ask all organizations out there to look not just at their quantitative metrics, but at the qualitative, impacts that they have in whatever their sphere of influence is. And you're doing it, I'm sure, at the school level, at the school board level, and in the district. It's an important thing, and it is hard work, and we need to put more focus on that.
I lied. This is the last question.
Thank you. Just in regards to thinking about how we could probably redefine our Chamber of Commerce to move away from trying to bring tourism in to taking on this role of a greater we economy, and really making that, putting it out there as the possibility of Jackson being a forerunner and being an example of a we economy, and the excitement that that could actually initiate in the town and as a community. Any comment on that?
I'll start. So, I know Anna's in the room, and that's not her role anymore, and I don't know if Rick Howe is here or not, but, I don't want to speak for the Chamber at all. The Chamber has members, and I'm sure Anna can speak to you, privately more about how the Chamber has to react to what its membership wants, and its membership is all private sector, businesses that tend to be dependent upon people coming to this valley to be successful, right? They tend to be hospitality, tourism, recreation, retail type businesses. All I can speak to is what we're doing at Silicon is sort of, we're the yin and the yang of what the Chamber has been doing, only in the sense that we are looking at companies that can create meaningful, well-paying jobs to maintain a thriving middle class. And the way you get that is by having companies that can scale beyond the valley and that aren't dependent upon people actually coming here to spend money, but can be successful by doing stuff as they grow. So, I'm not qualified to speak to the Chamber, and I don't want to get myself in trouble on that one. But I know that there are initiatives, and I know the Travel and Tourism Board is morphing to more of a managed approach to what they market as opposed to a come here approach. So I think we need to keep pushing on that.
Yeah, just a quick build. Again, was excited and honored to facilitate the Travel and Tourism Board strategic planning meeting, which is public, so I can talk about it. But the big piece they talked about as part of their goal in this morph is how do we maintain community? And I think an opportunity, whether it's Silicon Couloir or the Chamber of Commerce or Travel and Tourism or many, or JHMR, big organizations, is how do we come together just like we were talking about on housing initiatives, to have a common language of the we, and where are those edges. So in our Venn diagram, we all have our different pieces, but that there is some commonality in those values, and how we still allow thriving and flourishing and economic vitality within the we and the I. So it's a both and, right? Not easy, but if we're committed, anything's possible, right? They built like all those big jets in World War II in like half a day. I'm from Detroit. We could do this.
So we're going to put a big jet factory in the middle of Spring Gulch is what I'm hearing. Would you please give a hand to our speakers?